He just told me that you're going to play this. I didn't know. I recorded this song a long time ago. I love Gene Ritchie's song. And the idea behind it is to just have a meditation on whatever part of the song speaks to you.
Welcome, everyone. It is such a joy to have you with us. If you're someone who celebrates Valentine's Day, thank you for joining us in the love that God joins us in together. I'm Margaret Cooley. I'm the director of Woolman Hill Retreat Center located in Western Massachusetts. And we are currently not accepting groups because of COVID, but we still have our sense of a container of spirit holding you all, even though we're not physically present there. I want to welcome Peter Blood Patterson as the visionary behind this series, and Jen Higgins-Newman, who you'll hear from in a bit from Beacon Hill Friends House. And we have Katie Breslin here today as the guest presenter. Welcome to Katie, and to Lynn, Katie's elder, as well as Dorothy, who's eldering for Peter. And they'll all be holding all of us in this space together. Welcome to each of you, whatever your relationship to the complex book called the Bible is, and however you connect to or struggle to connect with the Spirit or God, or however you identify that essence in your life. Welcome, whatever you're seeing out your window, whatever your view is in this moment. And I wanted to just bring us into the present space, first by acknowledging the land that Woolman Hill is on, which belonged to a Comtock woman named Mashalisk, and it was unjustly taken by an English settler in the 1600s. The land acknowledgement feels complicated in a virtual setting, and also feels complicated in terms of making it authentic and not just a form without life. So I'm just choosing in this moment to acknowledge with all of you that many of the spaces we are in are influenced by the history of white colonization and its ongoing repercussions in the present. So I'm acknowledging the work still needed to build right relationship with Native peoples and with ourselves. If you want to take a deep breath and just arrive in this moment, you can picture the open fields at Woolman Hill covered in snow right now. And on a ski recently in the woods near there, I stopped to pause and feel all of the surface covered with snow, every surface there, and heard a pileated woodpecker knocking on a tree, and just felt the incredible peace of that space. So bringing that peace into our presence here now too. We'll have a brief welcome from Jen Higgins-Newman, a tech welcome, and a welcome from Beacon Hill Friends House. And then we'll have a little opening worship. We'll hear from Katie, and Peter will ask her a little bit about her relationship with the Bible and why she chose the particular passage for today. We'll hear the passage read aloud by two people. And then we'll have time for small groups, and followed by an open large group sharing, which will wrap up around 5:15. And at that point, folks are welcome to go on to your other commitments in your life, or you're welcome to stay for another 20 minutes or so of more informal question and answer and discussion. So we'll walk you through that as we go, but settle in and enjoy one another in the spirit as it moves with us.
Thank you, Margaret. And we'll keep this short so we can get on to our content this evening, but my name is Jen Higgins-Newman, and I wish you a warm welcome from Beacon Hill Friends House. The Friends House is a Quaker center for learning and action, and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values, based in downtown Boston, Massachusetts. I'm in our library filled with many old Quaker books. All right, so now I'm going to turn things over to Peter and Katie.
Peter.
Welcome. So I want to say hi to everybody that's here. We got about, I think, 55 or so people in the room already, 50 anyway. And more may be coming later. This is a good message to take off the screen. as Margaret just said, you're all very, very welcome, whatever your journey has been with the Bible, little or long. And we're going to be present with the Bible, with each other, and with the living Christ who guides us and is with us, dwells within us, and is present with us today. So to start out, Katie, as Margaret hinted at, why don't you just share briefly a little bit about your own journey with this book?
I've definitely had a journey. I started my journey, I'm a former Catholic, and a lot of my work with the Bible was through stories, childhood stories, through Sunday school, through hearing it at church, but I never really read it myself. I realized that I'd always read it through the lens of other people. And I think that that's really important to acknowledge because I heard the way that they interpreted it as opposed to the way that my lived experience was living or walking through the Bible. And so when I came to seminary, I am a Earlham School of Religion, Master's of Divinity candidate here at ESR in Richmond, Indiana. It was the first time I had actually physically picked up the Bible and read the actual text, and then also read, with the accompaniment of my professors, I read the incredible resources and, commentaries, and found, womanist theologians and feminist theologians and queer theologians. And it really opened up my mind to this text being something that is not just something that I have to kind of fear as a queer person or as a woman, but as someone who can actually embrace pieces of this Bible for my own spiritual journey. So it's more than Veggie Tales. That was my original suggestion, but now it's bigger than that.
Great. So we ask each of our guest Bible teachers to tell us, to choose a passage and tell us what drew you to that. Why is that passage of this long book the one that you chose to have us walk with, be present with today?
Absolutely. And, we started with Genesis, right? That's the beginning fundamental text. And as I mentioned, the Bible was relatively unknown for me when I was going into seminary. And so for the first semester, I decided to read Genesis because it's the first book of the Hebrew Bible, and it holds some of the most referenced stories that we know, the Tower of Babylon, all these really important contexts. And so as I studied Genesis, as I mentioned, I looked at not only what I was reading, but I looked at the words that were being used. I was looking at the commentaries. I was going further into it than I think a typical just picking up the Bible for fun at a hotel. And the story of Adam and Eve as a queer person was not one that is usually lifted up for liberation for obvious reasons. And women coming from the flesh of man, it doesn't really send, nice, warm feminist feelings to those of us that, oppose, are like, what is going on there? But I started thinking about what lenses I bring to the Bible. And that's why I really appreciate the series of Walking with the Bible, because I recognize that my lens, the lens of a woman, lens as a white person, the lens as a queer person, as a cis woman, these are really important lenses for me to bring to transform this relationship to Genesis and to the story. And so as someone who's really invested in community building, another lens that I bring, I wanted to hear about what Genesis had to say about that. And that's kind of why I'm bringing this passage of Genesis 2, 15 to 25 to our group today. The story of Adam and Eve is the start of the first community on earth. And one of my favorite parts of this passage is when God says to Adam, "It is not good that humans are alone. I will make him a helper that is perfect for him." I think that that's a beautiful statement because, in times of crisis, when I feel alone, my community is the one that I usually go to support me. And I hope that I can be there to support them. And then, of course, God creates all these animals and birds and livestock and these incredible creatures to fill our world, just like the incredible, life-giving earth that we live in. And I think that that was also important to look at. But in search for the perfect helper, the Hebrew word was ezer, which is used here for helper. And it's important to note that the other places it's used is usually used to to describe God. Specifically in Psalms 11, 5-9, it says, "O Israel, trust the Lord, he is their helper and their shield." So for me, when I was reading back the text, if helper was used to describe God in the Bible, one can conclude that God would not be in a submissive role, that the word helper is not submissive, but it's rather an ideal partner. So someone who Adam can rely on. And to me, that is ideally what community is about. A community that helps us even when we've made mistakes, one that helps us with godly tasks of taking care of the world and being good stewards to God's creation. I see Jen put the helper into the chat, so you can see it and Google it later. And it's important to me to look at the text with the knowledge I have now about the importance of helpers in the community. And I'm joined here by members of West Richmond Friends meeting, which is my home meeting here in Richmond, Indiana. And they have definitely been helpers, and I hope I've been a helper to them. And the rest of the passage it serves as a reminder that we are from the same flesh, a humbling reminder that we are all in this together. So the final part of the passage, which I actually was thinking about as we were doing our own reflection today, Peter, and the pre-worship, is about the word naked, which we'll hear used. They were naked, but not embarrassed. And of course, later on, they're embarrassed because of the apple situation that they get themselves into. But I thought about what it means to be naked with one another in community, to be vulnerable with one another. God's community is meant to be a community where everyone could be one with one another, a godly community, a beloved community like we have. And perhaps we are a naked community in that way. And we are best when we can be vulnerable. So when we talk about queering the text, it gives us permission to look at the Bible in a new way. So this is what I bring to you today, a request to look at the text with a new eye and perhaps to see what we can learn that could be helpful in our work with the Religious Society of Friends, with our own religious communities. So that's what I'm excited about in this passage. A very long-winded answer, but it is important.
Oh, no, it wasn't that long. So this is exciting. I'm sure we're anxious to get started. So I think Sam from from West Richmond meeting is going to start us off, and Jen's going to post it so people can read along as Sam. I think she'll put up on the screen, and you can read the first part of the passage, Sam.
Absolutely. The Lord God took the human and settled him in the Garden of Eden to farm it and to take care of it. The Lord God commanded the human, "Eat your fill from all the garden's trees, but don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because on that day you eat from it, you will die." Then the Lord God said, "It's not good that the human is alone. I will make him a helper that is perfect for him." So the Lord God formed from the fertile land all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky and brought them to the human to see what he would name them. The human gave each living being his name, its name.
The human named all the livestock, all the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But a helper perfect for him was nowhere to be found. So God fell into a deep and heavy sleep and took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh over it. With the rib taken from the human, the Lord God fashioned a woman and brought her to the human being. The human said, "This one finally is bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh. She will be called a woman because from a man she was taken." This is the reason that a man leaves his father and mother and embraces his wife, and they become one flesh. The two of them were naked, the man and his wife, but they weren't embarrassed.
The queries today that we came up with are, what are ways that those in our faith community serve or have served as helpmates for each other in times of new beginnings? How do others that we are in relationships with, whether it be friendship, romantic relationships within our faith community, etc., help us further our relationship to God and our stewardship obligations? So I hope that those queries are helpful, though, of course, as Peter said, please bring to this what you are getting out of the text today. I'm excited to hear.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Hope you had good small groups. Are we all pretty much back in, you think?
Yeah, we should all be back here.
Good. So did you want to say anything more, Katie, right now?
Yeah, we had a really fruitful and worshipful space. I'm really grateful to the elders that were with Peter and I to kind of think more into what we were talking about earlier. And I'd love to share a quick story of a time that I've asked for help. I asked for a clearness committee through my meeting, West Richmond Friends, and some of the members of that clearness committee are on this call. And at the end, I remember being so vulnerable, asking for this help. And a friend Eden Grace said to me, this is the sweet sauce. This is the sweet sauce of, asking for help. And so I was really touched by not only the ways that asking for help feels, but also the way that being helped or helping others feels. And that's something that really came to me, a story that I thought a lot about. How about you, Peter? What are you thinking about?
When we were preparing with this passage, what came to me was that this is one of those passages that's sort of used as a bang them over the head passage by some people in Christianity. You gotta be straight because look, it says there, what happened? Leaving your parents and going to your wife and blah, blah, blah. Exactly. But what would that passage be like if there was no gender in there? If it just said God created one human and then God looked at that human and said, this human is alone and I want somebody else to be there too. And then God created another human and made that human out of the first one so that they were connected, bone of the same bone, flesh of the same flesh, and saw the second one as a helpmate, or they were going to be helpmates for each other. And that would just remove all that stuff about hierarchy and who submits to whom, blah, 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 blah. And it would just be about humans in relationship with each other and caring for each other, holding each other accountable, being present in all the ways people can be present for each other.
Yeah, I really love that interpretation because I do think it is important to think about, this is a Bible that has a very old text, it's Iron Age logic, and we've just learned so much about gender and sex and the way that relationships work. And so I think it's important that we bring these pieces in our interpretations to the Bible, because it's not devalidating the experiences of those that are queer, that are trans, etc. It is important for us. So I really appreciate that you pointed that out. And when we were talking about that, that really got me excited too.
We're going to throw this open to all of you now. And the best way this works, I think, is if you click on reactions, you'll see a thing that says raise hand. And I think most people are on computers. If you're on a phone, it may be a little harder. But on that reactions, you can raise your hand and Jen will immediately see you. And she can call on you and invite you to unmute yourself and share whatever's on your heart. And if you really can't get the hand to raise, you can wave back and forth, but it may take a while for somebody to see you. Or you could probably send a text or a chat to Jen saying, I'd like to share. So we'll just kind of settle for a second. And as soon as someone's ready, has something on your heart, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Great. And Margaret put in the chat that if you're calling on a phone, you can press *9 and that should raise your hand for you. We also want to create some spaciousness. So I will take some time in between speakers. We encourage friends to be brief in their sharing if you're able to, so that we can allow more voices to be heard. So we're going to just take a moment right now. Susan?
When I saw the text, the first thing I thought when I thought about Genesis 2 was not what we ended up reading together today, but I felt like I should share just a little bit about the story of the serpent and the snake and Adam and Eve eating the apple and being punished. I just want to say that the story of the fall, as with a capital F, as it is told by most Christians, is not there in the Jewish tradition. For the Jewish tradition, this is progress. They are in the garden. They don't have to work very hard. They don't have any responsibilities. God takes care of them and provides them with plenty that they need. And it's like a childish state. And like every human being, they have to make mistakes and grow up and face the results of their mistakes. And leaving the garden is not so much a punishment as it is just to keep them away from the tree of life, because God doesn't want them. Presumably when they were in the garden, they could be immortal, but now they have to accept the realities of human life, which includes not being immortal, and therefore they are shut away from the garden and the tree of life. It's a very different attitude towards human life and human nature. You don't have original sin in the Jewish tradition. And the story of Adam and Eve is a story of maturation and growth. So I just wanted to share that with you.
David?
Well, I welcome help from people who know Hebrew better than I do, but my cursory knowledge calls to our attention that the word Adam, translated man or human, is very close to the word for dust or ground or earth, Adama. And I don't believe that that is gendered. And I'm not sure whether all nouns in Hebrew are grammatically gendered. But this is in contrast to the very last verse in the chapter, Ish and Isha, that's male and female. But that's quite secondary. The original entity of what we are as humans does not depend on gender.
Rua?
Yeah, in our small group, Liz Nicholson, who is in Richmond, I was in a group with 3 people from Richmond, the only New Englander. And Liz shared a different view of this becoming Eve that really touched me. And it's something I'm going to think about a lot, that this word rib can also be thought of as side, and that so out of this one human, there became 2 just out of the side, which means that that original human was both male and female and just separated. And it just, I thought it was really mind-boggling and wonderful. So thanks to Liz.
Steve?
When Susan reminded us that the fall from grace and original sin are uniquely Christian doctrines, I thought it might be valuable to add or to expand. These doctrines come to us by intellectual thoughts or whatever of of scholars who introduce and publish, and they gain acceptance and in the culture and so on. And quick history, in like 1000 and something AD, in other words, about 1,000 or so years after the time of Christ, a guy named Anselm, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, comes up with this doctrine, this new idea, that Jesus Christ is the atonement of that original sin. So like 1,000 years after, and by the way, Anselm reaches back to Isaiah to get support for this doctrine. Okay, so it's out of the book of Isaiah somehow that he construes this. All right, it's interesting because near the end of his life, another saint, by the way, canonized guy, just across the English Channel there, Robert Abelard, comes up with a completely different doctrine of salvation, that Jesus provides a model or example, or as George Fox preached, Jesus Christ is come to teach his people himself, and that being by example or by experiment, or and this I knew experimentally, and so on. And in our queries, I want to say that the way I think that I have learned or been helped or nurtured or shown or whatever, how to have a relationship with God, how to have a relationship with others, and how to have a relationship with the earth, be it stewardship and so on, is by example, because these are large constructs that can't be, written down and talked about as much as shown. And so in community, in Quaker community, I think we look to our elders, et cetera, to find the ministry of example or modeling.
Jan? You're muted.
Sorry. One of the Bibles I discovered in France is the translation by a guy named Cherokee. And one of the things about his translation is he uses different names for God. I mean, so does King James and others, but this made it more clear to me. It's hard to explain. He takes IVH, he takes Yahweh, and he has the I and the V at the end of it and puts Adonai in the middle. So you have a very complex name for God. And then sometimes he adds another one to it. And in these two chapters, in the first chapter of Genesis, God is Elohim, plural. And that's the one where God creates male and female. Although in that one, God creates Adam le glebe, which is out of earth, and that's the name. But in the second chapter, he changes the name of God to be more complex. And also when he says he formed the glebe, which is the thing he made first, and it has Adam poussière de la glebe, Adama. So it's Adam and Adama in the same sentence, the same phrase. So one is, it's sort of like, I think what Rua was expressing, how with the ribs, it's like parts of the same body. And, next week is Ash Wednesday. We all come from that. Dust. You come from dust and you return to dust. And the name of Adam is much more dust in this translation, which keeps reminding me every time it's mentioned that that's what they're talking about, this bit of dust and earth. And that's Eve also. And I was surprised in this way of reading it that there is a rib. In the beginning, you don't have a sense of form. And then when a rib is taken, you think, oh, so it must be more complete. But basically, the important thing is that whatever God is in the second one is the one, the second chapter is the one that blows air into the nostrils of this earth and makes it come alive. So that earth, that ruah, that is necessary for clay to become something else. And the way that works is just a mystery. It's just a mystery. And it might be different gods that are doing it, or different concepts of God that can do it in different ways.
RJ?
Hello. I am very inspired by everything that I'm hearing, and I love this time that we can share together. And of course, there's so many thoughts running through my mind, but just to be succinct, one thing that's coming to me is really my excitement about reading texts of all sorts, but particularly this one as a historical document from an anthropological or literary perspective, or any framework we look at, is this is a text of consequence. The way that it's, our lives have been shaped, whether we're religious or Christian identified or Bible reading or any of that, just the consequences that have come from the presence of this document and how other people interpret it can be very destructive, could be very nourishing. It just depends. And so the opportunity to reread it, for me, I would love to learn Hebrew, biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek, just so I can dive into that experience more. But then really having the opportunity, the freedom, the initiative, and the space to see them in different frameworks, from a queer perspective. And even if one doesn't identify under the umbrella of, queer identity, it still can shape or shift or grow or expand our perspectives, which is the whole point to the entering into this space of text. And so whether it's, the perspective of a woman, or even an animal in the story, or a tree in the story, or an element, often in film, the landscape can be a character, when we see in modern film depiction. So looking at all these elements, this rich, dynamic plethora of elements in a text is just really exciting. And so I would love, I'm looking for the opportunity to go more into the text with queer framework, feminists, also disability theology, and all of the ways that we can look at this, just to expand ourselves. If we don't have boundaries on the sense of what spirit is, or what, or life in general, let's try to, map that expansiveness onto our approach of a literary format as well. Thank you.
Annie?
In our small group, I was mentioning that I grew up in a family where my mother knew a lot about languages. And so she was always pointing out that, sorry, my phone is being annoying. She was always pointing out that in an original text, you might have this sort of play on words like we have with in the Hebrew for Adam also being dust, and Eve, I believe, is life. And I was thinking about how important is, one of the reasons I love being in a Quaker community is the way that we use queries. And for me, the question that I'm asking myself is, what makes me come alive? I identify as a woman, a cis woman. I identify more and more as someone who can question anything I want about my gender, and I'm feeling that that's a really good, wonderful gift that has come to me. by just being with other queer friends. And one of the thought that I had this morning or this afternoon with all of you is, what makes me come alive? What is the part of me that I want to see come alive more? What if I'm in the garden and a part of me is Eve? What is that part that's coming alive? And I think those of us that have done gifts work and helped other people on clearness committees, trying to seek out what our gifts are and various ways we offer gifts to our Quaker communities, to the outer world. I think that that's the kernel. That is such a good question. And it's one I think it's worth wrangling with. And lastly, I just want to say, the more I do work on racial justice, the more I recognize for me that I got to move my body more. I was trained not to. From my particular culture that I grew up in, I was trained to just sit still, especially in church. So I love the notion of being in the garden, moving around, and asking myself what part of me wants to come alive.
Stephanie?
I so appreciate Katie lifting up community and relationships on a day that tends to so glorify romantic relationships as to put into the pale every other kind. And while one or maybe more romantic relationships may be a part of our life over time, there are so many others that are important to have and be life-giving and being part of community. And so many marriages and other romantic relationships founder because so much of the need for companionship is concentrated between the two people, or if there are children or maybe parents living with them, just concentrated in that small relationship group, which is too small to bear the fullness of what we as humans need. We need friends, we need spiritual companions, we need people, I don't know, exercise with, read books with, study with, etc. And likewise, I'm so grateful for David lifting out that move from the early part of that chapter, talking about Adamah, the earth, and Ha-Adam, the human being. I remember Phyllis Tribble, I think this was back when I was in seminary a long time ago, published this book and used the term earth creature in place of the man or Adam. And I just love that because it tries to bring into English that richness of the Hebrew of moving forth between Adamah and Ha-Adam, and that, I mean, basically almost the same word. And I really appreciated in the translation from which Sam and Liz read, using the phrase the human being, although there was still the his in there. You know, I was like, oh, couldn't you say they or something like that? Because, you know, as David pointed out, there was then this movement to the them. And, you know, in our text, the them is gendered there. But as Peter noted earlier, like it wouldn't have had to be in terms of the importance of being accompanied and how important accompaniment is. So anyway, I could say more, but that's not being brief. Thank you.
So I'd like to pivot slightly here. We actually, in our small group, talked mostly about the last verse, which is about nakedness. And when Katie first brought this passage to me, she said, we're going to do through verse 24. And I said, you can't leave out 25. And she said, oh, what was I thinking? And I love the fact that this is where they're naked and they're not ashamed. And, you know, our society puts so much on nakedness as this kind of unhealthy, messed up, crazy, objectified sexuality. Full disclosure, I'm a hardcore skinny dipper. And I took a hike with a bunch of people from Mount Toby meeting a few years ago, all of whom I think were over the age of 60. And we headed off to Vermont and did a Quaker skinny dipping trip. It was really great. And the deeper part of this is that, you know, I think nakedness has to do with vulnerability and being willing to let ourselves be seen in our wholeness, not just the sort of parts that we're comfortable with, the parts that feel weak or feel imperfect or feel like we're struggling or we're dealing with addictions. And Dorothy Henderson, who's here with me, and some other people from here have been to a group called Quaker Spring. And a few years ago, we really focused on how hard it is for faith communities to be willing to be naked with each other in a deeper sense, and how important that was, and how we could create trust that we could be loved even if people see other parts of themselves. I'm going to put a little thing in the chat, which is from a closing minute from that gathering that's about this subject.
It's funny that I wanted to remove the naked piece from just out of accident. When that became, you know, when we were worshiping together in the morning, and then right before this, and then in our small groups, that became the focus of a lot of the work that we were doing in that small group setting. Though I have to admit that I'm a little embarrassed that I'm the only one, it seems, that doesn't skinny dip. So maybe I should add that to my 2021 New Year's resolutions. But yes, I think that the vulnerable, you know, our communities are better when we can be vulnerable and not ashamed. And so I think that that's an important lesson for us to bring forward. And so I'm glad that, Peter, that you convinced me to keep it.
Liz?
Yeah, I think something that was coming up for me that I appreciated from the queries was the focus on new beginnings was a term that was used in one of the queries. And I'm just thinking this year has been full of transition for me and for all of us from the pandemic. And I think that the pandemic has also allowed us to reassess the structures that we're living in and operating out of, and see if we want to build them differently. And are they working for all of us, and all of these things. And so I was thinking about this idea of vulnerability in new beginnings and in new spaces, and how hard that can be, and just how scary that vulnerability is. And I just really appreciated reading the minute that Peter just posted, and it really the language like hit so many of those fears that I hold when I enter into a new space of being perceived as weak or needy, or, you know, any of these things of and that what I've known from every Quaker community that I've stepped in, that's not going to, that I am going to be welcomed and held, and that takes a lot of loving trust. But I wish that I would be able to more tap into that space of fully showing up in all of my needs and in all of the ways, and working really hard to create a space that is welcoming for others to do that. And like, how does that trust begin when someone walks through our virtual doors of signaling and creating the space and welcome that allows for that deep vulnerability and relationship to form.
Peter, do we have time for one more? Okay. Jim?
In our small group, we talked a lot about the word helpmeet and helpmate. And those words were used a lot by George Fox and Lucretia Mott and others to emphasize and egalitarianness in marital relationships. And I'm not certain, but it may have been one very tiny innovation of the early Quakers was to take the space out between help and meet and make it a single compound word. Anyway, just wanted to share that.
And Katie, do you want to have the last word here?
Yeah, I'm just so grateful for, it's one of my favorite parts about Quakers is that they look at a text and they see the wordsmithing of Quakers, but also the appreciation here in translation. I'm just so grateful for the ways that Quakers have breathed life into this document and are finding new meaning. And so I'm just really just in awe of this time together. And I'm really excited to think about this for the rest of my Valentine's Day. So I hope that you are also thinking about community on your Valentine's Day too. Peter, do you have anything else you'd like to share?
So thank you, friends, for joining us. Why don't we just take a minute of closing thankfulness. Thank you, Katie, so much for bringing this passage to us today, this rich passage and your reflections. Thank you to our elders, Lynn Kinline, I think, is it right? Hope I'm saying it right. Yes, Kenline, and Dorothy Henderson is from Grass Valley Meeting and Pacific Yearly Meeting. Lynn is from West Richmond Meeting, and we were also joined today. Thank you to our readers, Sam Roller and Liz Nicholson, I believe, with our readers from West Richmond. So we had a rich attendance today, a number of other faces I saw, friends from West Richmond. And thanks so much to our two sponsors, Woolman Hill and Beacon Hill. We have two hills are sponsoring us. And I want to urge people to support these very, very important institutions that help us to live out our journey together as friends. And I know Woolman Hill in particular is in the middle of a big capital campaign and building campaign. So please consider that at woolmanhill.org. If you're intrigued by that little snippet about Quaker Spring is a kind of a Christ-centered, open-hearted journey with each other that happens once a year originally, but now we have gatherings during the year in this virtual time, and there'll be one on March 6th, and I put that in the chat. Everybody's welcome. It's a very open-hearted opportunity to do kind of what we do here.